Genesis chapter 6. If you remember, in Genesis 5, we talked about Seth and all of his descendants, and it came all the way down through Enoch, who's our picture of the translation, and then it gets down to Lamech, and Lamech has a boy named Noah. And Noah was 500 years old, and Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Chapter 6. Here we go. Something you need to know about these first few chapters of Genesis, it's not all in timeline order. It'll kind of jump back here and jump forward there. Right here, it's jumping back. Because we just talked about Noah, who's born like 1,500 years after Adam, and then it's going to jump back to just 100 or so years after Adam right here. So, chapter 6. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth. You say, when's that? Well, look at it. And daughters were born unto them. So, I mean, as early as Adam and Eve started having daughters. And so we're going way back now to maybe 100 years after, Adam. And obviously, Cain had a wife and Seth got a wife. So, daughters were being born. Obviously, we're talking about early on in the timeline here. And daughters were born unto them. So, just to give you a little picture, we're talking about 34, or like around 3900 BC. And in this passage, we're going to see that it's talking about Noah's flood, which happened around, or actually in 1656. Nope, it's 1,656 years after Adam, but the date is 2387 BC. Which is, around 1,500 years is this time span we're talking about. Between, a little after Adam all the way till the flood. And here's what God says about that timeline, about what was going on before the flood. It says that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And we've talked about this passage before, but it's very, very important to understand this passage. It's totally foreign to anything you and I really understand today. It sounds like sci-fi. It doesn't seem real, but it is true. And first question you ought to have maybe is, who are the sons of God? When it says sons of God here, what do you think? Who do you think that is? Sons of God. What's your guess?
Us.
Us? You and me are the sons of God. That's true after Christ. But before Christ, nobody was a son of God other than Adam and... Nope. All the angels were called the sons of God. So we'll take a glimpse at these passages. I'll turn there, you don't have to. I'll read them to you. In Job 1, verse 6, it says, "Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them." Obviously, we're talking about angels, just like Satan, going up and presenting themselves before the Lord. In Job chapter 2, verse 4, it says the same thing. "And Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin." Oh, that's not right. It'll be chapter 2, verse 1. I'm having trouble today. Chapter 2, verse 1. "There was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord." And then in Job 38, verse 7, we're talking about here when God has laid the foundation of the earth. God is talking to Job, and he's asking Job these questions. "Who hath laid the measures of the earth, if thou knowest? Or who hath stretched the line upon it? Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? Or who laid the cornerstone thereof?" And here's verse 7. "When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy." So God himself says to Job, before Adam ever existed, there were these people called the sons of God singing and shouting for joy when the earth was being created. You say, who in the world could that be? The people that the devil was talking about in Genesis 3 when he said, "Ye shall be as gods." It was these angels, the sons of God. It's very clear. In the Old Testament, sons of God always refers to angels. Adam was the only human ever called the Son of God other than Jesus Christ. And then in the book of John, it says, but as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God. Once Jesus Christ comes around and dies and is born again, and is risen again, then those who believe on him are given power to become sons of God through Christ. But outside of Christ, no human is called the son of God other than Adam. The reason I have to say that is this. Most Bible teachers today, most modern Bible teachers who go through Bible college will tell you that these sons of God refers to Seth's line, Seth's lineage. They call it the godly line of Seth. And you'll hear that in most commentaries and things like that, and it's just not true. Two reasons. One, because the King James Bible means what it says. Right here it says, the sons of God saw the daughters of men. Two things I want to point out. One, sons of God versus daughters of men. Why didn't it say the sons of men? He could have said sons of men. Is he trying to confuse you? Is he trying to trick you? No. He's letting you know these are angels, not men. In verse 1, it said, when men began to multiply and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men. It's pointing out these are not human. These are different. These are the sons of God. These are angels. And 1 Peter 3:19, very important. It says, talking about Jesus, for Christ also hath once suffered for sins, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but quickened by the Spirit. So after Jesus Christ died and rose again, it says, by which also he went and preached unto the spirits in prison, which sometime were disobedient, when once the long suffering of God waited in the days of Noah. The people we're talking about right now in the New Testament, Peter calls them spirits in 1 Peter 3:19. So if you're taking notes at all, that's the point right there. Peter calls them spirits, and what they are is angels, sons of God. And in Matthew chapter 8:16, just to give you a little extra light, as the Bible likes to do, spirits could also be called. When the even was come, they brought unto him many that were possessed with devils, and he cast out the spirits with his word. So you say, what are spirits? They're not good. They're bad. Spirits, according to this passage, are devils. I grew up going to Disney World, and I loved it. And there's this thing called the American Adventure in there, and at the end it's got all these statues that rise up on the sides. And you know, if you've got any common sense about you, you know that Disney's evil and wicked and whatever. So is everything else on the planet, so is the United States. Get over it. We live in a wicked world. Enjoy what you can. God hath given us richly all things to enjoy. That's a cute baby. And at the end of this show, they've got these statues that rise up on the side, and they're supposed to represent like the spirit of America. And you know, one of them says like the spirit of adventure and the spirit of valor, the spirit of, you know, experimentation and the spirit of innovation and all these spirits. And I always just, even as a kid, that struck me wrong. I was like, what's a spirit? I always wondered. And you know, throughout the Bible, you see things like God sends evil spirits to people, and there are spirits in this room. And even lost people will talk about spirits. I've just been listening to this guy, you might have heard of him, named Jordan Peterson, who's a psychologist who's really famous right now in the conservative world, and he's always talking about this, you know, spirit that we're supposed to have, and how that when you set out on your course in life, you're supposed to decide what spirit you're going to follow. And you know, he's just a lost guy who thinks he's talking straight and trying to help people. What he doesn't know is he's trying to convince everyone on the planet to yield themselves to some devil. A spirit is just a devil. You know, have you ever, maybe you don't remember when you were lost, but you ever just gotten in a terrible mood and felt like doing something really mean? You know? When Saul, the king, got really angry and an evil spirit came upon him, he tried to throw a javelin through David's heart or head. He tried to murder David. You remember that? Now, if you went to the doctor and said, I've been having some really bad thoughts, what the doctor would say is, you've got a chemical imbalance, and we've got these drugs to fix your chemical problem, right? It's all chemicals, right? And you need drugs to fix it, right? That's what modern science says. What God teaches us in the Bible is he didn't need drugs. He had an evil spirit. So if you've ever had something come over you like that, it's very possible that was what's a spirit?
Devil.
Very possible that a devil was influencing you to do something wicked, and you know what that feels like. That just a welling up comes inside you, and you just, if you give into it, it can cause trouble, you know? And it's dangerous. That's why you shouldn't walk around just giving in to the Spirit, you know? Especially when we lived in Los Angeles, you are around that kind of wickedness more often. When I walk around in the woods, I don't get too many evil spirits and try to want to kill somebody or have a terrible thought. You know, when I'm walking through the woods, I'm usually thinking, God, thank you so much. This is beautiful. This is wonderful. I love this fresh air. You know, but when you're walking down the street in Hollywood, you're thinking, that's gross. Stay away from me. You're a creep, you know. And there's just disgusting stuff. And these, I'm not kidding, these different attitudes come into you. And you walk by and they're playing some, you know, loud music, and it gives you this kind of spirit of pride. And they're playing this other music, and it makes you think like, oh man, I wonder what it was like 20. You just start to try to, it does everything it can. The spirit of the place tries as hard as it can to suck you down to its level and to make you act like them, to make you feel like you want to be one of them. That's what spirits do, devils. They try to make you act like their father. How in the world did I get there? I don't know. We're talking about the sons of God and the fact that they are spirits, they are angels, they are devils. They are not men here in Genesis chapter 6 and verse 2. The sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair. And anybody in here, tell me, what do you think the word fair means today? When we say fair. Good. Yeah. But just, yeah, if somebody looks fair, what would you say?
Average.
There we go. That's what I'm looking for. Today, fair usually means like, it's fair. You know, if I come home from a restaurant and I say it's fair, that doesn't mean good, right? That means like, it is okay, right? If you look up fair in the Bible, you'll see it's not that way in our Bible. It's totally fine that that's our modern meaning. What I wanted to point out is that in the Bible, fair means like really good looking. David was fair to look upon. There are several women it mentions that were fair and goodly to look upon. Fair in the Bible doesn't just mean okay, it means like beautiful. So when it says they saw the daughters of men that they were fair, it's talking about just very good looking. And they took them wives of all which they chose. And in the New Testament, God comments on that in Jude chapter 1 verse 6. Angels were not supposed to marry women. It was against the rules. And in Jude 1:6, God says, the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation. That's talking about these men, these angels right here. Here's what their punishment was. He hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day. Even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set forth for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. So it's very clear. There's a time again where God calls these specific beings in Genesis 6 angels in the New Testament. I don't know how anybody believes it's anything other than angels. And in 2 Peter chapter 2 verses 4 and 5, 2 Peter 2, 4 and 5, it says, for if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly. So it's very clear here that these angels broke the rules. They were not supposed to mate with women. They were supposed to stay separate. And notice, it's no female angels, it's male angels mating with female women. You say, why? There are no female angels. Every angel in the Bible is a man. And these angels, the sons of God, saw the daughters of men, that they were fair. And they took them wives of all which they chose. Verse 3, and the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man. I'm not always going to wrestle with them. I'm going to be done with them at some point. Yet his days shall be 120 years. God says his days, man's days, shall be 120 years. Now I believe that's still true to this day. I believe that in Genesis 6, God set it up so that a man will live 120 years if he lives a natural full life. And there's still people today, every now and then, who make it to 120. But the average life gets cut off, anywhere from maybe 65 to 95 in an average range in America today. My grandma went to 96, I think, and I had a grandpa die at 86. I've had a grandpa die before he was 70. People There's a range. But I believe men are designed by God to live longer than they do today, and I believe the reason that we die so young in this generation and for the last 1,000 years or 2,000 years is, one, because men are sinful, two, because we're corrupted, and three, because we eat disgusting, filthy food, and we breathe disgusting, filthy air, and we do disgusting, filthy things that have effects on our bodies. And we eat processed junk, and we hang out with, we live in a really gross world. We're designed to eat fruit off of trees and eat meat, and instead we stuff Cheez-Its down our face, and we're not doing too great in the diet department as human beings. And I believe a part of the reason we die so young, 70, 80 instead of 120, is just because we don't do well with our bodies. And a part of that is that there's the spirit of the Antichrist that is in the world today wants people to die young. He wants people to have as little chance as possible to hear the gospel and be saved. And, there's all kinds of conspiracies you hear about. Lots of people believe COVID-19 was designed to kill people. Obviously, that's true. There's something to it that somebody wanted some people dead. Yeah, of course. Some people believe that, the government sprays chemicals in the sky that, poison our air. Maybe they do. Who knows? It's definitely true that wars are not fought by the rich. Wars are fought by the poor. Wars are used to keep population down. And it's obvious that World Economic Forum just met wherever it was in Europe or somewhere, and this organization talks about how they want to depopulate the world and they want to have a world population of 500 million in 15, 20 years. Okay, so this group of people publicly comes out and tells you we want 7.5 billion people to die in the next 15 years. These people who are some of the wealthiest in the world, who have control of a lot of the world's governments. You say that sounds like a conspiracy theory. Not really, just the devil's in control of things, and he kills. That's what he wants to do. So I believe a part of why our lifespans are short is because the devil doesn't want us living that long, so he's affected the earth and our bodies. And, even though we're saved, we are still subject to the consequences of our natural decisions. And it affects us. So God said his days shall be 120 years. And if you pay attention, after the flood, people don't start dying at 70. They start dying at like 150 and 120 for a long time. 120 was average. And you say, but I thought 70 was like the lifespan because of that one verse in Psalms. Well, that's not talking about us. That one verse in Psalms is talking about Jews and the time that they'll spend in captivity. But that's not the point. Genesis 6, verse 4. There were giants in the earth in those days. Now, question. When he says in those days, what is he referring to?
Before the flood, 1,500 years.
There we go. I used to think, until really recently, I always thought this passage was like right before the flood, these sons of men, or these sons of God came unto the daughters of women. That's kind of the way I thought of it. That like this was a group of people just right before the flood that did this. And no, he's talking about when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, which was early. So God has been watching this wickedness unfold on the earth for like 1,500 years, for a long time before the flood. God has been allowing this evil to go on, and now, verse 4, there were giants in the earth. You say, in what days? In those days. I mean, for a long time, there were giants in the earth. And people have all these questions, like how in the world did they build the pyramids? And how are these statues of these giant things? Where'd those Easter Island heads come from? And where'd Stonehenge come from? And what's all this stuff? There's a snake in Ohio, this mound, this serpent mound that is this giant pile of dirt that looks like a snake. And on the summer or the winter solstice or the summer solstice, it points directly at where the sun sets in the western sky. It's amazing. So how in the world could some Indian who's just focused on trying to find a deer for his wife build that? There are things that exist in the world today that survived the flood that are from a civilization far more advanced than you and I can imagine. They were way more advanced than you and me. The United States of America, if it dedicated all of its resources, could not recreate the Great Pyramid of Giza. That pyramid that's sitting right outside Cairo, Egypt, we couldn't do it. It's too impressive. It's too perfect. It's amazing. And it's very obviously has endured a great flood. I mean, it looks like it's been washed over with a lot of water. There was a civilization going on before the flood that was so much more advanced than you and I can imagine. And they got to do that for 1,500 years before God killed them all. And I just don't understand how lost people don't see the evidence that the Bible is true. It all lines up so perfectly, so wonderfully perfectly. And the devil's just really good at deceiving people. There were giants in the earth in those days and also after that. So not just then, there were also giants after the flood. When the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children unto them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. So we're going to look at a few aspects of this verse. First, giants. Now we've talked about this in the men's devotion before, but I want to go over it with everybody in here. Giants. This is the origin of giants. We've all heard stories of giants, and you know, giants are in a lot of fairy tales, and what's his name? The Jolly Green Giant. There's all kinds of giants all throughout history. There's giants in the story of Hercules. You've seen movies with giants. This great big tall guy. And when we think of giant, usually some actual person pops into our head. Who pops into your head when you think of a giant?
Goliath.
Goliath, right. Goliath pops into my head since I've been told he was a giant since I was a kid. But something we're going to learn tonight is that Goliath was not a giant. Let's learn a little bit about the giants in the Bible. If you've already heard this, I'm sorry. If it bores you, I'm sorry. Get over it, it's cool. Goliath. Does anybody remember how tall Goliath is?
9 feet.
Yeah, right around there. 1 Samuel 17 and verse 4. The Bible says that he was not 6 cubits and a span. So 6 cubits is like 6 of these right here. So it's like 9 feet and a span, which is the length of your hand. So about 6 inches. So he was about 9'6". This is probably about 8 foot. So he was like 1.5 feet taller than this right here. I've seen some tall people. I've been around 7 foot. I've played basketball in college against people who were 7'2". I know what a tall person looks like. They're tall, but it's not like blow your mind. Whoa, that guy's huge. That's a giant. No, that's a tall guy. If I saw somebody who was 9'6", you know, he's almost 10 feet tall, I think that's a really tall guy. But I wouldn't go, it's a giant, you know. Whoa! No, it's just a really tall guy. And something I want to point out to you, if you look up Goliath in the Bible, you will never find anywhere where Goliath is called a giant. The Bible does not call him a giant. It calls him a son of the giant. There was a giant in Gath who had 5 sons, and Goliath was one of those 5 sons. And his dad was a giant, but he was not. Makes you wonder how tall his dad was. He had brothers called Ishbi-Benob, Saph, another brother, and another brother who was a man of great stature. It says, these 4 were born to the giant in Gath and fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants. So, if these 4 were sons of the giant, and one was Goliath's brother, then Goliath is not the giant. He's one of the 5 sons of the giant. And Goliath is never called a giant. His father was called the giant of Gath, and I would imagine he was a lot taller than 10 feet tall. So, first thing that pops into my head is Goliath. And right away, you got to throw that out. Goliath was not a giant. He was just a big guy. He was called a champion. He was a great warrior, but he was not a giant. Giants show up because of this relationship between angels and women. And there are these weird names for giants all throughout. Like in Deuteronomy 2, 9 through 11, there are giants called Emims. E-M-I-M-S. And then in Deuteronomy 2:19, there are these things called, this is a funny word, Zamzumims and Horims. These are all giants, by the way. Horims and Avims. These are all different races of giants that still existed on the earth during Deuteronomy, after the flood. Caphtorims and Anakims, Rephaims, Horims, I could keep going. Lubims, Sukiims, Mehunims, Nethinims, Zephims, Cheraphims, Gamadims. God names an awful lot of these races of people. Do you see something in common with all these words? Ims, right? IMS, 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 IMS. Whenever he's talking about a race of giants, God tags an IMS to the end of it. There's only one other word in the Bible. There's all these giants, and there's one other word that ends with M's. You know what it is? Well, two. Seraphims, cherubims. Both types of angelic beings, which should be another point to show you these giants are not the result of Seth and his descendants. These giants are descendants of angels mixed with men. And God puts a little angel tag on the end of their name to let you know that. So, what were they like? The Bible gives us little clues on these giants, just how tall they were. And they were scary. They were types of people you wouldn't want to mess with. They were massive. If you look at, gotta find the passage. Numbers 13:33. This is when the 12 men went to spy out Canaan. You remember that story? Joshua sent 12 Jews to spy out the land of Canaan and see how it was, and they came back, and 10 of them said, we can't do it, it's scary, right? And that's why the Jews had to wander in the wilderness for 40 years, because they didn't believe God, and they didn't go into Canaan because these 10 men said, we can't do it. Well, you say, why in the world would they not go in? They'd seen miracles. Something must have scared them. Exactly. Numbers 13:33, it says, and there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak. Listen to what they say, which come of the giants. And we, the Jews, were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. As what?
Grasshoppers.
So, like, if here's a man, well, I'm the worst artist that's ever lived, but here's a man, and, you know, what would you say a grasshopper is like? Like that big right there, maybe smaller?
Yeah.
We were in their sight as grasshoppers. Now, if I was standing next to Goliath, I would say I was in his height like Karen is to me. You know? I was like a little girl. No, they didn't say we were half their height. They didn't say we were a quarter their height. They said we were in their sight as grasshoppers. I ran the math just to see. An average grasshopper is about 2 inches long. I would guess a Jew back then might have been about 5'6". I don't know. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say they were short. If they were only about 5'6", if a Jew was 5'6" and he looked like a grasshopper compared to this guy, then this guy would have been about 180 feet tall. That would have been a tall dude. And, you know, you can look at that passage alone and say maybe he was just using a matter of speech there. Maybe he was just exaggerating. And, you know, that's possible. Maybe they were exaggerating at that time. But Amos chapter 2, verse 9 came up. Amos chapter 2, verse 9. I think everybody in here is between 5 and 7 feet tall, right? Is anybody shorter than 5 foot? Are you shorter than 5 foot? 4'10"?
14.
Okay. Well, everybody in here is between 4 foot and 7 foot, right?
My dad, no, my brother and my dad about that. Well, my dad do.
Okay. Everybody in here is between 4 foot and 7 foot. Now, that's a decent range for human beings. 180 feet. I mean, picture the biggest pine tree you've got on your property, right? Times 3. Times 2, times 3. We're talking huge, 180, but that's a big maybe, right? Maybe they were being serious about the grasshopper thing. Amos chapter 2, verse 9. This is God speaking. Yet destroyed I the Amorite, which is another race of giants. These are actually the ones that Caleb killed on that mountain. Yet destroyed I the Amorite. This is God speaking. Whose height was like the height of the cedars. You ever seen a cedar tree? Now, Goliath was not as tall as a cedar tree. Goliath was not a giant. These guys were giants. I pulled out the handy-dandy Google, and I looked up in Israel, what's the height of an average cedar tree? And it says 120 to 180 feet tall. 180 feet. Giants. You know, people, you go down to the Museum of Natural History and sometimes they have a femur that they say is from like a brontosaurus and it's like 30 feet long.
That's a giant.
You think that was a giant's leg maybe?
Yeah.
Possible. Possible for sure. Maybe that was them. I mean, giants. And God doesn't use the word giants to talk about a little 10-foot tall guy. He's talking about a giant. Big old dude. There's a lot of interesting things you can get out of that. I'm trying to pick and choose the things out of this study that might actually be important. There's a man named Og, a less common one. He's kind of like Goliath. Yeah.
I got a question.
Yep.
You said normal women give birth to giants.
Yeah, you're going to have to take that one up with God when you meet him. I have no idea. I have no idea. What I know is, and something that we'll go over here in a minute, I would imagine that they come out, I don't know. I would imagine a baby would come out normal size, and because it's the son of an angel, there's something supernatural happening with its growth while it grows up, you know? Because, you know, I don't think you can find a pair of pants for that kid at Sears when he's 36 feet tall, you know?
That's a 10-foot baby.
Yeah. So I don't know. That's a great question that I don't have the answer to. I wish I did. It doesn't have to be complicated. They probably came out normal size and grew.
Yeah.
You know, it had to be born of a woman.
Yeah.
So there you go. There's another man, not Goliath, the king of Gath, but Og, the king of Bashan. He remained of the remnant of giants, and he was around in Moses' time. In Deuteronomy 3:11, it says that his bed was 9 cubits long. His bed was 13 feet long. And it says that he was of the son of the or he was of the remnant of the giants. So he was just one of the descendants, like one of the small guys, and you know, his dad was probably 30 feet and his grandpa was probably 50 feet. See what I'm saying? While those giants withered away, the people got shorter and shorter, but some of them were still pretty tall. And yeah, crazy. But when God says giants, he means giants. He's not just making it up. And another thing I wanted to point out about, you know, the Anakims, the Amorites, the Goliath's dad, who was a giant, and Og, the king of Bashan's ancestors, who were giants, were all after the flood. And it's important to note that because it says right here in Genesis that there were giants in the earth in those days, that's before the flood, and also after that. Which tells me this: the ones that God killed before the flood, and those angels that were sinners before the flood, God sent them down to be in hell right now. And then after the flood, more angels decided to do the same thing and produce more giants. Which tells me this is still possible today. And I know for a fact, based on the prophecies in Isaiah through Malachi, that it's going to happen again in the tribulation. Angels are going to mingle their seed with men once again and produce these terrible offspring that are going to be mighty men and great terrible beings. And you know, they're
Well, over in Paul, where he's talking about the head covering for the ladies because of
Right.
the angels too. I mean, that could be a
It is.
Yeah.
And there's no explanation. In 1 Corinthians 11, it says, "For this cause ought the woman to have power on her head." And it's not talking about a head covering on her hair. Right there, it's talking about she ought to have a husband or a father protecting her spiritually.
Right.
She ought to have power on her head. Why? Because of the angels. Say why? Because they still want this to happen. And women need protection from that. And, you know, men, if you're not spiritual, you have no chance of protecting a woman. You say, well, it hasn't happened for 2,000 years. Okay, well, you stand guard anyway, you know. Devils are still out there to deceive. And, yeah, so there were giants in the earth in that days. And also, after that. And it says, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. And something stood out to me while I was studying this. Men of renown. Renown, throughout the Bible, means fame. Famous. Everybody knew their name. And something about famous people is that their name usually doesn't die in that generation. There's people who I never lived at the same time as, and I know their name. Elvis Presley, I believe, died long before I existed. Marilyn Monroe, John F. Kennedy, Woodrow Wilson, John F. Kennedy. I just said that. Woodrow Wilson, I'm thinking of the other president, Roosevelt. FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, the one in the wheelchair. I'm thinking about Teddy Roosevelt, the boss. There's all these men who I never knew. Why in the world do I, in 2023, know their name? Why do I know Abraham Lincoln's name? Question, fair question, right? He's been dead a long time. Why do I know his name? Well, because he was of renown. He was famous, and his name got passed down. That's what happens to men of renown. Their name gets passed down. And, people always wonder, what in the world was it like back then before the flood? If they were, well, I believe that we have pretty good records of what happened before the flood. And I believe those records are found in the mythology of Greece and Rome and Egypt, Samaria, and Babylon. We have all these mythologies that people say, they're fake. And you think about the stories like Zeus and Olympus and Hercules and Achilles and all these gods that we read stories about when we're, in literature class as kids. And people will say, what amazing imaginations the Greeks had to make all that up. I don't believe they had much imagination at all. I think they had history books from before the flood. I think they had accounts of these men of renown. And, there's no coincidence that every culture has the same exact stories, just with different names. Like, Zeus, you've heard of, right? You've heard of that old god Zeus, the one who's supposed to throw the lightning bolts. He was the Greek god, but his counterpart in Rome was Jupiter. Same guy. Is his name still around? Jupiter? Have you ever heard that word before? We named one of our planets Jupiter, right? The biggest one. Here's another one, Poseidon. That's the Greek god. You know what his Roman name is? Neptune. You ever heard of the Neptune? He used to be 9 pizzas. I don't know what they call him anymore, but that's what I used to know him by, Neptune. Hermes. You know what his Roman name is? Mercury. Artemis. Her name is Diana. Ares, whose name is Mars. These should be familiar. We named our planets after these men of renown. Their names and their stories survived because they were famous and because they accomplished amazing things, but they were not good things. These stories are true accounts of the descendants of angels who did great wickedness and wrought so much evil that God had to destroy the face of the earth in order to rid their wickedness off the planet. There's all that. Man, this is gone a lot faster than I thought. Genesis 6, verse 5. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth. And that, listen, every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. I mean, man. Jesus was pretty awful, or not awful. Jesus was very mean to the Pharisees that we just read in Matthew. But listen to that. I mean, can you imagine something much more harsh? Every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. I mean, all that any man on the earth ever did all the time was think evil imaginations. You say, what's that? You know what it is. Evil imaginations all the time. They thought about all the wickedness they could possibly think about all day long, all night long, nothing but evil and wicked. You say, how in the world did they get to that point? Well, the devils crept themselves into the world and their influence took over. And obviously there was, I don't think there was scripture at that time. There's some things we'll talk about in the next lesson about God's relationship with men, but yes?
Is that what they were conferred to as the Dark Age?
No, Dark Ages that people talk about today are from 500 AD, so 1500 years ago, until like 1500 AD. It's when the Catholic Church was in control of the world and plunged us into utter darkness by massacring Christians and preventing people from reading. God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually, and it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth. And if you studied the Bible at all, repent doesn't mean that God was wrong and he had to get right for his sins. God never sinned. It just means that he changed his mind. He changed the way he was thinking about it. It repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth. And I can understand God's perspective here. Just 1,500 years ago or so, he had made Adam, and it was perfection in the garden. And since then, mankind, they sinned right away, they betrayed him, they lied to him, and then, they had kids, and God probably looked on that and said, here is fruitful population, something good is coming of this, and then, boom, Cain murders his brother. It's just, everything goes downhill. It's terrible. And it devolves to the point where 1,500 years later, women are running around with angels and they're giants, and everybody's doing nothing but thinking awful, wicked thoughts all day long. And God just says, I'm done with them. I'm going to wipe them clean off the earth. I'm going to restart. God even mentions this later on with Moses, if you remember. He tells Moses, I'm going to wipe out all the Jews and I'm just going to restart with you. And only because of his mercy and because of Moses' prayer, he didn't. The Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast and the creeping thing and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. That's the very first time the word grace shows up in the Bible, and it's because it's a picture of God's grace, not only on you and me, but on mankind whenever he chooses to have grace. We're going to stop right there. We'll get into Noah in our next lesson, Lord willing. Last thing I wanted to point out, actually, in verse 7, it says, he's going to destroy man who is created from the face of the earth. He says both man and beast. It's something I want you to think about just a little bit. Man and beast and the creeping thing and fowl of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. I forgot the guy's name, but in science class we're taught that this guy made up a classification system of all the animals, and whales are this type of mammal, like mammals and fish and birds. I think that's like the big breakdown. And then there's all these subcategories of invertebrates and vertebrates and amphibians and fish. Well, the real breakdown, according to God, is man. Science tells you that you're just a mammal, right? You're just an evolved monkey, right? No, you're a man. And we are separate from the animals. We are not the same. A lot of Christians today believe that mankind is just another mammal. We're not a mammal. We are a man. Another classification, beasts. I guess the dogs and the dogs and the cats and the bovines and the kangaroos fit into beast. Creeping thing, that's, spiders and all the insects and bugs and creeps, scorpions and whatnot, and fowl. There you go. God makes it real simple. He lets you know. The reason I pointed this out is because it's going to pop up again when Noah needs to bring all the animals onto the ark. God uses some very important words that relate to these. So I wanted to bring your attention to that. Any questions at all? I've got a trillion questions that I would love to know the answers to about this whole time period of history. It's really remarkable. It's amazing that there are some things like the pyramids that exist from this time. But, God revealed to us what he wanted us to know so far. I'm okay with that. Any questions? Great. We've got Sunday, not tomorrow, but 2 days from now. We have church. We'll have Sunday school, right? And morning service, evening service. No, because it's the first Sunday.
I think.
So, no evening service. Anything else, Pastor? Okay. Be in prayer one for another. Pray on these things, study these things, search out whether what I've said is so. And let's go home. Lord, I thank you so much for your words. I pray that you'll help us tonight to believe them and to trust in them. I pray that you'll help us to make these words a part of our hearts and our lives and everything that we believe and everything that we identify as in this book, God. And I pray that you'll help us, Lord, to go home and to actually study this and to spend more time in it. Not just spend time in your word when we're at church, God, but to spend more time when we're alone. And pray that you'll help everybody here and bless them for coming and help me as I continue to study and help Pastor as he studies for church on Sunday. Give us the words to say and help us as Christians to have the words to say to those lost around us. Pray that you'll be with us as a church, God. Be with those who are sick and heal them. It's in Jesus Christ's name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
I do got a question. Not about just something I read today. Now I'm in First Samuel right now. You know when
No more. It would have been cold. I was in Walmart after work.
Mom, do you see baby Timothy?
Where it said that,
That Daniel Kelly got from Mom when she see. Come here with
Put that coat on for. See, Marion, what you doing? Put that coat on for.
Gonna need it in the morning and tonight too. Talking that way in the morning, ain't you? About 19 in the morning.
Put that coat on there.
Yeah. The wind chill said it'd be 13.
That is chilly.
they did
That is chilly.
I hope we don't have to be out long.
Not, it doesn't say God would kill our baby, but it did right. What it says is the reason that he didn't is because he was going to kill him. Because it was God's will that he was going to kill him. What that tells me is it's the same as Pharaoh.
I was standing here thinking.
Because up to before that point, he had already hardened his heart so much that God knew he's past the point, just like the Pharisees. He's past the point of no return.
That's how long believe on it.
Look at it now.
I'm going to let them hear the rebuke from their dad, but I'm not going to let them obey because they're done. They've lost their chances. I'm going to kill them. That happens a few times. That happened with Esau.
I told that lady that she should hire
I don't wanna be
you,
that
that
guy.
you're slack, lazy, and all the.
So, if they got rid, still gonna die.
Yeah, then she put me on the phone, and I said, yeah, everything she said double that.
That happens too.
I don't know. I talked to her every
You
time.
work today?
Okay,
Because of all that.
clear that up.
That's a good one.
Alright, go ahead, Matthew.
Where are you now?
I want to know about the pyramids.
I had a line back.
Oh, okay.
I told one of them girls, I was like, are y'all gonna call it Coach Sparks? They're doing it busy. I'm like, I'm gonna call it Coach Sparks. And they like, they finally got on the ball and I said, no, they didn't hire me.
In mythology,
I didn't even sit there the last week and nobody gonna be here early.
those who are in charge, and then
Oh, water.
children who are usually half people in the mythology, because half God, half man, children who had these, superpowers, and they would do the will.
Y'all be careful. Careful going home.
And, depending on what technology they have, maybe the giants
Your mother told me that, you double O's.
they had technology
Almost 10
where
fingers.
an average man could
I saw a picture, he did
push the buttons and have this thing float up there.
So you was part of the dream team of Ashboro?
I don't know about the dream team.
Well, you said
You know, they give out the shirts every year, so I just take.
I wouldn't know nothing about that, preacher.
Oh, you don't have like a employee appreciation day where they,
This is all we get.
well, they do.
5 every year.
They do an employee appreciation day every year, usually since September. And, they'll feed you, and they bring the ice cream, homemade ice cream in, and there's a bunch of door prizes, and they give you a shirt.
Right.
Just all kind of, have a bean bag, not a bean bag, what's it, we throw a hack sack in the hole.
Oh, cornhole? Cornhole
They
tournament?
have some tournaments, and golf tournaments and everything else. So they do
We
that
just
every
got
year.
back to start doing that, small golf tournament, and then bowling tournaments. And I mean, we have, Planners does a few things, throughout the year.
Tend to look up.
Yeah.
It is